You might remember last week we talked about spoiler alerts. Well, here is the biggest one of them all, the book of Revelation. Now, just remember, it's one big long vision, so it's just a singular revelation. It's not the book of Revelations, it's the book of Revelation. So, this book, the book of Revelation, the final book of the New Testament, has some of the most dramatic and sometimes frightening language in the Bible as it describes an apocalyptic vision of the end of the world. The book's author, who calls himself John, has a vision of terrible and wonderful things, and he's told to write them all down so that others would be warned or encouraged or comforted. Tradition has it that John had this vision while living on the island of Patmos off of the coast of Turkey. We think he was likely a refugee whose home in Jerusalem had been leveled, totally destroyed by the Romans in response to a Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire, just a little more than 50 years after Jesus lived and died. One scholar, Elaine Pagels, describes the book of Revelation as wartime literature. She says it comes out of that war in Jerusalem, and it comes out of that situation and is meant for a population who has been destroyed by war. Well, think about that for a moment. What have wartime authors written about in our era? Well, hopelessness versus hope, or love in a time of war, a future full of evil intentions, and perhaps a resounding call for peace. The book we are beginning to look at together today is no different. Scholars think that much of what we find in the book of Revelation, couched in the fantastic imagery of red beasts with 7 heads and dragons and monsters and cosmic eruptions, are descriptions of events that for the author John were very close and very real. The war in Jerusalem, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and the Roman emperors who were living at the time. It seems as though John reacted to all of these catastrophic and traumatic things, saying, Jesus is coming and he is going to destroy all of this. It was John's conviction that the actual destruction of Jerusalem that he had lived through was the beginning of the end of time that Jesus had predicted. Many of the images in the book, Pagel says, are thinly disguised metaphors for images associated with the ruling powers in Rome. The great scarlet beast with 7 heads and 7 crowns, for example, may represent the emperors from the dynasty of Julius Caesar. And the name of the beast, which we are not told, but is represented by the numbers 666, may in fact refer to Nero. Pagel says that scholars deduce that 666 equals Nero through a technique of calculating numbers and letters, so that basically it's a code where you could take anyone's name and have a numerical value of each letter, and then you add them up or multiply them in complicated ways and you find out what that name is. The point being that John would have wanted his readers to understand that this particular number, which is couched in this mysterious code, would be understood to his readers as the name of one of those emperors who destroyed his people. Shortly after John wrote the book of Revelation, Christians facing persecution from the Romans seized on his message, seeing it as an imminent promise of deliverance from the evil that threatened them. And for the past 2,000 years, Christians have been reading Revelation as if it applies to conflicts and struggles in their own time. If you read it as John intended, you think, God is on our side. We, of course, are on the side of good, and help is on the way. Now, the book of Revelation, strange as it is not unique. It belongs to a genre of literature known as apocalyptic writings. Many of the images in Revelation are similar to those found in the book of Daniel and Ezra in the Old Testament. Whenever God's people were in trouble, they turned their eyes heavenward and their hopes to the next life for rescue and redemption. Surely God was on their side and would save them. For the followers of Jesus, who was last seen on earth, crucified and tortured by the Romans, this vision of Jesus enthroned in heaven and returning as the ruler of the world is almost like a perfect retaliation for all of his suffering. Moreover, all of the faithful who had suffered for his sake under Roman persecution would also be honored and restored, safe by his side in the inner circle of those who would lead his praises forever. What a comforting image that must have been for them at that time. And it's continued to provide reassurance to those who have suffered for their faith in 2,000 years since. Today's passage describes a previously unprecedented moment in time when all of the nations of the earth are united as one, praising God and acknowledging Jesus as King. It may put you in mind of Palm Sunday's procession into the city of Jerusalem, where Jesus was first hailed as the Messiah. Well, because everyone here is doing the same. That's where the palm branches come in. A diverse multitude united in the simple joy of being safe, safe, safe at last. Like John Lennon said, imagine it. No language barrier, no religious divides, no wars, no hate, just peace and praise. Yet, here's the irony. Almost every generation since this was written has co-opted this imagery of an apparent victory of Christ over all of the oppressors of the earth to justify their own evil oppressions. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisition, even the Holocaust, to name just a few instances where unbelievers were tortured and killed in the name of Christ. Why is it that we are so hardwired to think that if you're not in, you're out? Why does our faith, or any faith for that matter, feel that it must conquer others in order to succeed? Jesus didn't say, go out and kill others who don't believe in me. He said, go out and teach and share the good news that others may believe. In today's peaceful and joyful image, I see the world being redeemed through Christ's love and God's grace. And the trials and tribulations of the world are done and gone. This is not a matter of conquering, but of overcoming with love and grace. Now, this passage is a sneak peek, a spoiler alert, to give us a chance to see the end of the story. Like every good thriller, there are horrible things that happen that lead up to the rescue. And the reminder is to every reader of every era that even though things might feel horrible and hopeless right now, the message is, remember that all is not lost. Things have frequently been so bad that people of faith have longed for and even expected Jesus to return to set things right. Even in our time, we may see the world so upset and upside down. We feel things just can't get any worse. And these must be the end times. But God's timing is not ours. people have found that out when they've expected the end of the world to come again and again and again. And so we wait, and we hang on to this vision of a day when everything will be made new. How does that help us now, though? Well, it may comfort us to know that things turn out all right in the end. That the injustices we see now will be addressed someday. That the bad guys won't get away with things forever. Maybe that's a comfort. For many, there's consolation in knowing that God sees their suffering and their tears. In this passage, it says that the tears of the martyrs will be dried. But later in this vision, a little bit later in the book of Revelation, when everyone gathers at the throne of Jesus, that promise is spoken for all. In God's new kingdom, in the newly made world, there will be no more sorrow, no loss, no death. And what a joy that will be. And perhaps the greatest comfort of all is the idea that we continue on, that people we know and love will be there with us, gathered together, and we shall see each other again. We all have ideas of what the afterlife would be like. What the afterlife would be like. A fisherman might hope for a waterhole where the fish bite all day long. I have a friend who says that heaven will be filled with golden retrievers. Now, my John always hoped that heaven would be where there was the best food and the best wine that he had ever tasted. And no one had to clean up or do the dishes, of course. Maybe these things are too whimsical, too close to our human experiences to be holy. It's a human thing. The Egyptians buried their dead with everything they might need in their next life. Clothes, jewels, even transportation in some cases. I don't know that heaven works quite like that, each getting to do whatever they please as their eternal reward. Rather, I think this vision of St. John the Divine gives us a sneak peek as what to expect. The focus is on Jesus. All people want to do is praise him and celebrate in the glory of God. Now, we might think that that would wear thin after a little bit. We have very short attention spans after all. So I don't know that it's an eternity of praise, like Psalm 119 with 176 verses, or some praise choruses that just seem to go on and on and on. I think that in heaven, time is different, just as we are different, and the whole world is made new. John's vision points to an afterlife of peaceful coexistence in the glory of the God of the universe. Not only all the nations are mentioned, but also the animal kingdom is represented. Now, it's possible that the 4 animals that he mentions may also be symbols for nations or powers, but it could simply imply a coexistence with the natural world too. The author John can't believe his eyes, what he's seeing. This is a wonderful moment after all of the devastation that he has previously witnessed in his vision, and a little glimpse of reassurance before the last things begin to unfold. The message of Revelation wasn't just for the first century, it's for us too. It's a message of reassurance for a church in crisis. The early church was in trouble. It was under attack, it was fighting for its existence, and it was not sure that it would survive another generation. Now, does that sound familiar? Now, maybe here in Canada, we're not being tortured or persecuted for our faith like they were then, but we are in crisis nonetheless. our church crisis that we're facing is redundancy. Who would care if the church disappeared? After we're gone, who will care enough to ensure that the church continues its mission of worship and evangelism? Good question. But just when we were wondering if we should, after all, just close the doors and sell the property, we get this message that God endures. We know the ending. We know God wins, and the world listens, and the world is healed. It should give us encouragement to keep plugging with God's message, to not give up. We are reassured to see that God honors the hard work and sacrifice of those who gave it all for love of Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that we should keep doing the same things in the same old way, not at all. And we'll maybe think about that together some more next week. But for today, our takeaway message is this. Tired and discouraged as we may occasionally or presently feel, it will be worth it. Every bit. God promises it, and God never ever breaks a promise. Thanks be to God. Amen.